Welcome to the Exam Room Podcast, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I'm the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so much for listening. In more than 150 countries around the world, making the Exam Room one of the most consumed nutrition podcasts anywhere on the planet today. I will tell you that I get excited by literally every guest that comes on the show, but the level of excitement for our guest today is particularly high because she is a survivor and a thriver to the next level and the level beyond that. Her enthusiasm is absolutely contagious. It is infectious in the best way possible. And I'm so thrilled and honored to have Dr. Dawn Mussallem here with us today. Thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you, Chuck. It's such an honor. And I love listening to your show myself. So thank you for all your work.
Just look at that smile. I'm going to break the wall here. Look at that smile. I mean, just unbelievable. Your story truly is second to none. We hear about all of these incredible transformations that people had been through. I've been joined by some extraordinary guests. I don't think that I've ever had anybody on who has overcome as many challenges personally with their own health and then in their own life as well, as you have. And you are a survivor in every single regard of the world. And just let me start by asking what the word resilience means to you.
Thank you, Chuck, for saying that. It means so much when people share that my story inspires them, but to be in my own story, in my own life, it has been such a gift. So I feel resilience is so individual for each person. For me, my resilience was able to get through kind of this multi-layer experience with adversity and to rise above and to have that adversity teach me how to really lean in and embrace that sacredness, that preciousness of life. And those awe-inspired moments, I live with goosebumps. I get goosebumps all day long in everything I do, including when I just said that. And I just wish, I joke sometimes that I wish people could just step into my body and experience the preciousness of how I experience life, because it's such a gift. It's such a miracle. And I love to tell people that too, that I am a miracle. It's so cool.
I would definitely say you qualify as a miracle, bordering on sainthood. As somebody who was also raised Catholic, just the fact that you're sitting here today is unbelievable. So let's dive into the story. As this is your first time here on the show, there are a lot of exam roomies who might not yet be familiar with you. Stage 4 cancer survivor. And you got cancer at a very early age. What happened?
That was so tricky because as a little girl at the age of 4, I was enamored with healthy living. So I really set the stage to be the healthiest version of Dawn, and my parents supported that way of living from the time I was 4 and beyond. And so I went to undergraduate studies and studied exercise, physiology, and nutrition to further inform that knowledge and science, and then went on to medical school. And then in medical school, I got diagnosed with stage 4 diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. They had told me that I would have 3 months to live without treatment and 20 months to live with treatment. And because the cancer was found so advanced, I had seen multiple doctors. And because I looked otherwise healthy and I never wanted not to, I was like, it's okay. I'm really not that sick, but I'm having a little bit of a hard time breathing. Use an inhaler, one doctor said, and it didn't get better. So I saw another doctor, and this doctor kind of, again, probably looked at me and thought, oh, she looks fine, use it more. And then saw a third doctor, they said it was in my head. And that's when I really thinking, gosh, am I being weak? Am I being a wimp? Like, get tough, girl, that kind of a thing. And then a few days later, I collapsed, ended up in the hospital with this crazy diagnosis. So it wasn't like I was being irresponsible and not going to a doctor. They just weren't listening to what I was expressing them, and they literally never listened to my lungs. So
do you think the fact that you had embraced healthy eating and a healthy lifestyle from such a young age, I'm sure that came up in conversation with the doctors, like that's also a reason why they didn't go down, the path further with you to explore, really what is happening here?
Exactly. And this was, 24 years ago. This was in the year 2000, where back then it was so different. Now there's so much awareness about cancer. I remember going through treatment with chemotherapy. I had the bone marrow transplant, radiation, being bald. I would only wear a wig in public, except for maybe a few times. And oh my gosh, the looks I would get from people when I was bald, they kind of, I think, thought, because I didn't really look unhealthy. I think they thought I just shaved my head, that kind of a thing. And I think the reason I didn't look unhealthy is because I took such good care of myself during my cancer treatment. And I describe when I looked out at the other people during my bone marrow transplant, because you could see the other rooms, glass doors.
Yeah.
They were sick. They were essentially dying in an effort to live, where I attained my vitality without pause. And I continued to eat healthy during the entire time of my cancer journey. And I continued to exercise and have deep belief in God and my faith and spirituality practices. And I believe all of that really set the stage for me to get through that cancer diagnosis without really losing a beat, if you may.
So when they give you're in medical school while all this is going on, and they give you 3 to 20 months, and you're like, I'm still going through with school. I think a lot of people will be like, well, forget this. Like, I'm just going to go do what I want to do. Why was it important for you to continue your studies?
That was my purpose. I mean, I didn't have a child at the time. It was just me, and I needed a purpose. We all need a purpose, a meaning, and a why in our life. And that was my purpose. And I described that purpose of my desire to one day want to deliver original medicine through this lens of love for humanity. I love people. I love people even more now than I did then, but I've always just loved people. And my mom remembers describing, like, if I'd see more elderly people at the grocery store, at church, I would just love people. Like, I love that ability to connect and experience that warmth in that exchange with them.
That is unbelievable. That's so cool. And I know that, like, you had worked it out with the doctors there. So you had a bike in your room, you had a bike out at the nurses station, because I think you were in Arizona at the time, and they put it out by the nurses station so you could watch the sunrise. You're an early riser.
I kept my schedule. I did not let cancer define me. I continued my life without any adjustment to what that meant to me. So I always set my alarm at 4 a.m. I still do to this day. And so when I was in the hospital, and even other hospitalizations in my story that we'll probably talk about, set the alarm at 4 a.m. I would wake up, I would study, I would ride my bike. My oncologist was very respectful and honored the fact that I wanted to take really good care of myself during my bone marrow transplant. So he had a bike in my room, as well as one by the nurses station, so I could wake up and ride that bike and look at the sunrise, go over the mountain vistas. It was really special.
The coolest. Was part of the reason also why you continued on with your studies because you didn't want to put a time limit on your time here on Earth? Like, you still had goals and you were going to achieve them come hell or high water.
It's like I had this knowing I was going to be okay. It was like I had this autonomous motivation to steer my own ship and prove them wrong. And I've had some people ask me, do you think that like ignited that fire even more? And maybe, but I don't know. It's kind of just how I am. Like, here I was, from a young girl wanting to be one of the healthiest people on earth. I wanted to prove that, hey, being a cancer patient doesn't mean you have to be sick. Like, you can rise above. And gosh, I did. As soon as that chemo started melting that huge tumor, it was a 16 centimeter mass wrapped around my chest, the heart, the great vessels. So I was really unwell. And so as soon as that chemo started removing that burden of cancer, oh my gosh, it was like my life was back. And I would climb Camelback Mountain during my chemotherapy when I would even be anemic with blood counts in like 8. I would go and climb Camelback Mountain. I would start running again. So it was just amazing.
So what is the effect on of somebody with going through such invasive, treatments as chemotherapy, radiation, to exercise? A lot of people are told to be relatively still, be sedentary at that point. That is very counter to what the majority of people will be told to do. Why is the exercise so important?
It is. And what's amazing is the guidelines, the American Cancer Society guidelines say that exercise prescription, recommending exercise to patients at the time of cancer diagnosis is when it needs to happen, not months, years later. Is close to diagnosis is the same thing for nutrition. That we want to have more of that whole food, plant predominant instruction for cancer patients as close to diagnosis as possible. Very few centers uphold that, likely because of resources, but at Mayo Clinic, we're very supportive of wanting our patients to exercise. We know that exercise for breast cancer patients, it shows improved outcomes. We know that in terms of women who have metastatic breast cancer, we see improved outcomes in those who exercise more. They have more energy, less fatigue. Fatigue is something that burdens the majority of cancer patients. And then brain fog. A lot of folks will talk about chemo brain. We know exercise can help to mitigate that as well. So exercise is so important, and it doesn't need to be in the gym, sweat, high intensity interval training. It can just be walking, just moving your body. It can be gardening, it can be dancing with your husband. Whatever is special, I just want my patients to move. That's the key. And especially if it can be in a group, organized exercise where you have support of others, or that accountability can be really wonderful too.
Yeah, and I know that that's another big part of your message is the community and how important that is to help somebody rally with their own health, right? Because when you're alone and you're isolated, those outcomes tend to be not nearly as good as when you have that whole army behind you.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, 60% of Americans report feeling lonely. And as we get older, that number increases even more. And we know that can lead to premature death. We get so worried about dying from, heart disease, diabetes, stroke, cancer. Well, premature death means you die earlier from any cause as a result of things like this loneliness. We know that it can have the same impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
That's hard to believe,
right?
That's
a lot of smokes.
It really is. And the similar impacts to that of alcohol, about a double-fold increased risk of that when a person's obese. So loneliness is something we really want to focus on. And a lot of folks may be home alone, but they're on social media, and they think that social media is a fix to loneliness, and it's not. It's not the same as a person having that direct human exchange.
Topic for another show, but I think social media can absolutely be like a double-edged sword. It can fill, a little bit of isolation temporarily, but man, you can go down some dark rabbit holes too on that thing. So, but you strike me as the kind of person who really has always kind of had that community, that army behind her. You just have that bubbly personality that draws people in, magnetic, right? So you have this support. How long were you undergoing chemo and radiation? Because clearly you're sitting here today, you had a really good outcome.
I did. So I went through 4 months of chemotherapy, and then I had my bone marrow transplant after that, where I was in the hospital for about 6 weeks. So a pretty prolonged hospitalization course. And then I did another 8 weeks of radiation after that was completed. So almost a full year of therapy from 2000 to 2001. And then once I was done with radiation, the stage 4 cancer was cured.
Nice. I love to hear that. I love to hear that. Yeah, right. Still get the thumbs up after all these years. I know, man. That's the coolest. Were you doing a lot of smoothies at that point? Like just like overloading on green? Well, not overloading, but just like boat loading greens and fruits. And what was the diet looking like? You've always been a healthy eater, but I think a lot of people might be curious.
Yeah, so it's so wonderful that you bring that question up, because a lot of oncologists still to this day tell patients during chemo they can't do fresh vegetables and fruits, and that's not true. In fact, the American Society of Clinical Oncology in the last few years has updated that guideline that neutropenic diets are not necessary to recommend to patients, because we know that getting the vegetables and fruits is helpful. Now, we shouldn't go eat salad bars at public places, but preparing those vegetables in your home is a wonderful thing to do. And for me, the answer is yes. It was hard for me to get large volumes of food. I'm not as much of a smoothie girl as I was a soup girl. Right. I like those soups with more of the savory and lots of vegetables, sweet potatoes, squash, leeks, you name it. I would put all kinds of things into a bowl and puree it in the Vitamix and let it get hot so it was super fast. And I would do smoothies too, but I just love soups. So I would do a lot of soups. And since my favorite breakfast in the entire world is oatmeal, I kept it oatmeal with a load of berries, and then I do my soups for lunch and dinner. So that's what worked for me.
Well, okay, Supergirl, what do you remember about the day that they told you your cancer was clear? Do you remember that conversation with the doctors?
I do. And it was like, tell me something I don't know. It sounds kind of cocky, but I'm like, yeah, I know. I've been climbing the mountain. I figured it was gone. I figured it wasn't there anymore. But, they would do bone marrow biopsies. And wow, those were pretty painful, because they would extract bone marrow from the back of your pelvic region. And so when we had that negative one, that felt really good. That was great news to get. And that was after the bone marrow transplant. So we felt very hopeful. The bone marrow transplant, when I had my cancer, the diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, rituximab wasn't a treatment option at the time. And so nowadays, that is kind of the path of treatment that most all non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer patients who are that particular type utilized, but I didn't have access to that back then. So that's why I had to do more aggressive treatments. And this is why research is so important. Funding of research, patients being involved in research studies, because it helps to inform the science for years, decades to come, so we can help others in less toxic ways.
Absolutely. So let's flash forward. You get your health back, you get your life back, and miraculous things start to happen for you personally. You get married, you're told like couldn't have a kid. Guess who's got a kid? Life is good.
Yeah, they said, you need to quit medical school. You're never going to be able to have a child. We don't have time for fertility preservation. And a few years after that bone marrow transplant, I found out I was pregnant.
Yeah, girl.
So total miracle. My daughter, her name is Sophia, born very healthy, remains healthy. She's 21 now. She's in college. So it's so exciting to see her thrive and flourish and just have her life. And she also is living a healthy lifestyle. So it's kind of fun when I do get to visit her in college, and her college roommates all come over and I get to make them grain bowls and plant bowls, and they love their tofu edamame. And so it's a really fun opportunity.
You're getting the college kids to eat like plant bowls instead of like greasy spoon diner food.
And they look forward to it. It's so cool. As soon as they know that I'm coming into town, I usually rent a house with a kitchen. So I'll pack a lot of foods, bring it from home because they live about 6 hours from where I live. So I'll bring a bunch of food and prepare it. And yeah, this just happened about 6 weeks ago. I had a big meal, about 20 girls come over, bunch of healthy food, all these different glorious colors. It's beautiful.
Dawn, I bet yours was the house that all the kids went to when she was still in high school too, wasn't it?
Kind of, but at that age, they're a little more resistant. You hit that wall where they're like, oh, if you go to Sophia's house, you better be ready because her mom's going to give you carrots and hummus. Oh, no. But they would all be open. I remember one cute story. Her one friend's name was Reagan, and the super greens, you buy the power greens or the super greens, and the Swiss chard. Swiss chard is like melts in your mouth. It's almost like there's water. It's so delicious. And so I had some of that. And so all these girls start picking it out and they're dipping it in the hummus. So once they would see me eating it, they would get curious and they'd taste it and be like, this is pretty good. So, But I think for all parents, there's going to be this little moment of resistance that you may have from about 7th grade through high school, and then they come full circle when they go to college and they have their independence, their skin isn't as clear, they're more tired, their brain's not working. They're like, wait a minute, I think mom was right. I need to get healthy again.
Mama's right.
Yeah.
Listen, kids, remember that mom always knows. All right. That's amazing. So congrats, 21 years. I mean, that's probably the greatest thing that you've ever accomplished, and you've accomplished a lot. But let's also talk about the other parts of your story that really are why I say that you're a survivor and thriver on so many levels, because you lost your husband very unexpectedly, very much sooner than anyone could have foreseen.
Yeah, Chuck, that was the hardest part of my entire journey, was losing my husband. And I had actually had other health problems that kind of spun out of the result of me having all that cancer treatment, because the radiation was right to the heart. That very high dose chemotherapy to cure a very advanced cancer caused heart failure. And so I had advanced heart failure that was diagnosed a few weeks after my daughter was born. I was very sick again. And so I got well enough to be able to go back to my residency training for a few years with that heart failure. But then in 2007, I had to take some time off. And then in 2008, a year after I had to take that time off because my heart was getting weak, my husband died of sudden cardiac death. And it was so hard, Chuck, because I was supposed to be the one that was going to die. We never thought he would be. So I wasn't prepared. It just was never a conversation we had. And I was born a very happy child. I mean, my mom will show stories that she was born like this. I mean, I love life. I just was given this gift of really loving life from the time I was born. And so me being ill was okay because I knew how to get through. It was like I had this innate knowing. Until my husband died, it was external to me. It was so hard to keep that up personality, and I didn't. I describe it as like free falling. All that joyful, blissful existence free fell. And for about a year, I couldn't be nudged with any stimulus. I couldn't listen to the radio. I couldn't watch TV. But I knew I had to show up for my daughter. I had to take as best care of myself as I could, so I could be there for my daughter, because now she only had one parent left. And so it was just so very hard. I was raised Catholic, so I always had belief in God, but it was never really like a strong connection. And after my husband died, I sat in this beautiful church, and there was a speaker, Sister Briege McKenna, and I listened to her talk about her love for Jesus. And I remember it was an awe-inspiring moment for me, and it drew me so close to my faith in God and the belief in heaven, knowing that my husband would be okay. And that's how I got through. And it was such a monumental opportunity for me to grow strong in my faith when I experienced the loss of my husband, but it was the hardest thing I ever experienced. I don't think there's anything harder than a loss.
No, definitely not. And I know that there are a lot of people who are watching and listening right now who know, sadly and unfortunately, exactly the emotions you're talking about. But then I circle back to what it was we were talking about earlier, in that sense of community. When you go to church, I mean, that's about as strong of a community as it gets. Did you find a lot of strength and support, not just from, the good book and the preaching, but also from, the other members of the church?
That's so true. And loss and that grief and sadness is that persistence of love, and that ability to be in, a church for me was so comforting. It's where I always went as a child. So it was like being home and being accepted, and having that love from that community was just so very important. So thinking about the blue zones, when you talk about faith, a lot of people get a little bit uncomfortable. Mayo Clinic was actually founded on the vision of a nun. So the Franciscan nuns are very involved with that early vision of Mayo Clinic. And so it's very special to me, all of that comes to that root system, even here at Mayo Clinic. But I can't encourage individuals to have belief in something bigger than themselves, whatever that is for them. But a loving, kind, non-judgmental God was something that was very important for me. And that concept of heaven is what really brought me through.
And you get that reconnection, and you're healing from that loss, all the while your heart is still not doing great. So where are you with your heart at this point?
Yeah, so that was 2008 after my husband died. And right before my husband had passed away, they did an investigational procedure. They put something called a biventricular pacemaker with a defibrillator in my chest. And it didn't really work in the beginning. But about a year after my husband died, I started getting stronger. So whether it was the device or it was just a gift from God, I'm not really quite sure, but I started getting stronger. I was able to go back to work, and I needed to. I needed that security. So I was able to go back to work. I finished my training. I did a hospitalist fellowship, became a hospital doctor at Mayo Clinic. And then again, it's like just this up and down with heart failure. Maybe I overdid it, but in 2015, I started to be unwell again. I started actually having these passing out episodes because I wasn't getting enough blood to my brain. And so the team at Mayo Clinic had given me this wonderful opportunity to kind of redesign the diagnostic breast clinic at Mayo Clinic, as well as to start the integrative medicine and breast health program. So in 2015, that's when I piloted this program built on the foundation of lifestyle medicine for breast cancer patients, with a large focus on that whole food, plant-based nutrition and movement and loving connections.
Nice.
It's perfect.
That's great. I mean, you just seem tailor-made for that role. I will say right before we recorded this, I had the opportunity to sit in on your presentation, and I will never forget listening to you describe kind of when everything almost hit critical mass for your heart, and you were in a boardroom, I do believe, at the Mayo campus in Florida, was it? Was it the Jacksonville campus? What happened that day?
It gives me chills to share this. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it with your listeners. And so it was September 22nd, 2016. And I was given the opportunity to present the success of that integrative breast health program. And I was so excited. I had just finished my morning patients, and I was running behind because I love being a mother. I love being a wife, but I love my time with patients. So this is like my top three things in my world. My patients are so special to me, but I was running late, and I remember hastily rushing to the stairs that I had to go down. And I remember planting my first leg in the stair, and it quivered. And I thought, what the heck's wrong? And I went through my mind. I'm like, did I eat breakfast? Yes, you had your oatmeal. Did I drink too much caffeine? Most certainly you had too much caffeine. Did you sleep? you definitely didn't sleep, like those kind of things. But I knew I had to get to the boardroom, so I kept on going down, and I was kind of scared. I'm thinking, what's wrong? And leading up to this, I was having these multiple passing out episodes, and so I was worried that something else was going to happen. And so I got to the boardroom, tried to open the door, couldn't open the door. Finally got into the boardroom. Everyone's sitting there so serious. I would usually make like this very lighthearted comment. But I was like, I'm going to just stay on track. So I took my seat, and I was so weak, I couldn't even control the mouse with the cursor at the opposite end of the screen. And within a few seconds, that was my last conscious memory. And, I remember being in this place of complete quietude. I had a 4-minute near-death experience. I remember my entire body being enveloped in love and harmony. And it was as if the hands of God, like I felt like this vast presence was holding me. It was so beautiful to be able to describe. And what I would say is I was more awake in this moment of what they clinically define as death than most people probably experience in a lifetime. And it was as if my non-beating heart had this direct connection to this very hopeful soul. It was like there was still this awareness, so much so I remember this one single hair was like stuck in my lipstick. And I remember just kind of having this slight awareness. It's so hard to describe, but the one thing I would say is I was in no hurry to leave that place.
Yeah.
It was so welcoming and love and peaceful. But then this huge wave of energy came through my body, and it was kind of preceded by this huge thump that actually lifted me up to where I was sitting up, and I regained consciousness. And one of the electrophysiologists here at Mayo Clinic, Rochester, they all reviewed the images extensively of the EKG strip, because basically my internal defibrillator kept on firing and firing and firing for 4 minutes straight with no return to life. And so the thought is maybe it finally just was able to grab one of those pieces of the spike that came up, and it converted me back to a rhythm that would sustain life. But when he reviewed that, he said he doesn't think so. He thinks I just came back to life, which is amazing.
It's crazy.
Gives you chills.
Like legit, you're talking about goosebumps. Like, wow, holy moly,
right?
Yeah.
But it was so funny. So, after you're out for the count, right? When I came back, I had so much energy because all this adrenaline. And I was like, okay, I can finish my presentation. They're like, no, you're not. So that was 2016. After that, things just it was really tough. I never regained my strength after that time.
Yeah, man, I would love to talk to you for hours just about that experience alone. I feel like there are so many questions to ask. I've never talked to anybody who's had a near-death experience like that. So this is really cool. But you say that, okay, after sitting up, going back to life and trying to get right back to work, which has been like really cool. Things, just as you said, started to go downhill a little bit more. So what continued to happen after that?
Yeah, I never wanted to feel sick. Like I kind of wanted to keep going. And I learned that if I could really elevate myself, I didn't feel the sickness. Like I never would feel it. But I would when I'd be alone. Like when I'd be centered around people, I had enough strength within me to keep on like trying to elevate, but it would get so hard. I remember even examining patients, and I'd have to lean against the table to like hold my body up, and my fingers would be blue because there'd be no blood flow. And then at the end of the day, my brain just wouldn't work as well. I still was able to be a doctor, be an effective doctor, but it was just so much effort to be alive. And they kept on doing procedure after procedure to try to help the heart salvage it in a little way. And then come 2019, there just was no more options available. The last procedure they did actually resulted in me having a stroke. I lost vision in my left eye. And so that's when I was listed for heart transplant. I was on the list for over a year with not one single call. And this was during COVID, so it became even more difficult to know what direction to go. And then in December of 2020, I was so unstable that they had to admit me at the hospital for the remainder of the time until they found a heart for me. And I was on supportive care. And then February 5th, 2021, a matching heart was found.
That's the day. Okay, February 5th, 2021. And I imagine when the doctor walked in, your goosebumps must have been like times 10, right? And you're a goosebump person, as you said. So the goosebumps when he walked into the room, what were they like?
That's what's interesting. There were none.
Shut the front door.
It was so interesting. And this is what's so hard to explain. So this is a shout out. 95% of Americans believe in organ donation, but only 50% actually register. There's such a shortage. And it was so hard because then the reality hit me that even though I had lived 18 years with heart failure, I had a near-death experience and I needed to be alive for my daughter, someone else had to die in order for me to live. And it was such a hard reality. And then the other thing that went through my mind was the heart. Like, is there an emotional heart? Would I lose some of that? Would I lose the memory of my beautiful childhood? Would I lose the memory of my husband who passed away, of my daughter's precious childhood? Would I lose that? Would I have a personality change? I had a colleague that suggested that maybe I would get a personality change. So all this stuff starts going through my mind, and I never really thought about it until that moment when he walked in. And then when he shared with me they had a matching heart, the next thing he shared is the donor is an IV drug user with hepatitis C. But you're getting more and more sick, and if we don't accept this heart, you may end up needing to be on full life support. And so it was just one of those decisions where I just needed to think about it. And then within a few hours, I had this total knowing this was the right heart for me, like beyond belief. It's like I have this direct connection with God. It's like, we're buddies. It's like, I don't know, but it was like, no, this is what this is meant for you, right? I don't know why this happened, but it's like I was given this opportunity to give this heart this perfect life. I feel like I have the perfect life. It's just so harmonious to be in my existence, I would say, And so I got this opportunity to give this physical heart a part of my spiritual essence, if you may, or this like spiritual vibrance. And I was so excited. And I remember getting to the operating room and having eye contact with my surgeon. And I had this total knowing that in just a few days, I would wake up to the beat of this new heart. And I remember rather than praying that I would wake up, I instead remember not an ounce of that. Instead, I prayed for the donor and the donor family. I was just filled with such gratefulness that this gift was going to be mine.
Yeah.
And then a few days later, I woke up.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're telling that, and it's like the song, How Do You Mend a Broken Heart, like pops into my head by the Bee Gees. I don't know if you know that one, but I was like, you are truly the person. And to me, what it shows is, and there were some, speed bumps along the way with this heart, but anybody who's facing their own health challenges, if you are able to take this heart, it is really proof of just how extraordinary the body can be in terms of healing itself, right? And now, like, you've taken this heart, which has been put through the ringer by an IV drug user with hepatitis C, and you're living happy and healthy and vibrantly with the same heart. Like, you mended the broken heart, Doc.
So beautiful. And I mean, I have chills. When I woke up from my transplant, I described so vividly. I remember hearing this harmonious sound, and it was my hair brushing against the crisp white linen sheets in the hospital bed, and it was in sync to this powerful beat of my new heart. And I didn't know you could feel your heartbeat. Like, my heart was weak for so many years. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna be able to sleep again. Like, my whole body's moving, and my body was warm, and I was like, holy cow, like, it's warm. Yeah. In my brain, like, I could think clearly. But I am such a proponent of whole food, plant-based nutrition, and I believe part of it, why I love it, is I believe it really increases your vibration and energy, and that's like probably like woo-woo to some people, but I believe in that. But when I woke up in this moment, like, it was like every single cell in my body was oscillating at this very high energy, and I haven't lost that.
That's
coolest
amazing. Thing. It's amazing. What kind of challenges before I ask you that, like, what are the rules about, whether or not a heart is deemed viable for transplant? I think it is kind of surprising to me that they would give a heart that was from somebody who had Hep C.
Great question. Oh my gosh, it's so complicated to find the proper match because you have to match the blood type, you need to match the body size, height, weight, and then there's all these different antigens. It's a very complex formula that goes into play to find a matching heart. That's why being so small, there's so many small Americans. You certainly, when it comes to children, there's a bunch of children on the train. So it's a very hard fit for someone who is my size with my type of blood type. But to answer your question, there is a lot that goes into that equation. And, you just have to wait and see. When it comes to the IV drug user heart, at Mayo Clinic, we're one of the few sites that transplants what's called a high-risk donor. And so, we actually have a liver transplant group at Mayo Clinic as well, though that's not what they would ever expect to happen. We know that there's very good treatments out there now for hepatitis C. And so sure enough, once I was able to be discharged from the hospital, which was several weeks after my transplant, and start that medication for the hepatitis C was cleared within a few weeks, totally gone. It's never come back.
Wow.
Amazing. Wow. So how cool is that we have this whole other ability to transplant these high-risk donors into patients like myself to give us a second chance at life because of advanced drug therapies. And so I took this drug called Mavorette, and that's what cured the hepatitis C for me. But it was a blessing that I was a patient at Mayo Clinic because they're one of the ones that do that high-risk donor sort of transplantation. Now they're doing some deceased donors where they have an actual machine where if someone dies, they actually can take that heart before that person dies and put it on a pump and then take that beating heart to the donor, and they can cross many state lines. So my donor was a deceased donor. My heart was actually on ice. But now they have this new way of transplanting patients over the past 2 to 3 years that they're doing these donors that continue on the heart pump that they then take and transport to places that are further away. So it's pretty cool, the advances.
Science is amazing, isn't it? I mean, that just sounds like some science fiction stuff, but that's real life. It's happening as we speak. That is so cool.
It's really cool. It's amazing to look at the pictures when you see that this beating heart is soon going to go into another person's body. Yeah.
And you actually gave your heart a name, didn't you?
I did. I had this amazing dream a few days after my transplant. And in this amazing dream, part of this dream, I was able to see, it looked like just this blissful existence of these people, families, love, harmony. And this word came over me. It was grace. And when I woke up in this very moment, I would always listen to instrumental music in the hospital room. And the song playing at that moment when I woke up was titled Grace. And so, of course, I couldn't sleep. So I checked my email. And the email waiting for me, you can't make this up. It's crazy.
No, I'm telling you, man.
It's so amazing. Was full of grace.
Yes.
And then the coolest part of it is because I wanted to put the whole food plant-based nutrition to the test and the lifestyle medicine and be like, I'm going to prove everyone wrong, that this really makes a difference. And just because you're a transplant patient, you can live a vital life. A lot of transplant patients, they're alive, they feel so much better, but they're not flourishing, right? And I am flourishing. I'm more alive than probably anyone I know. And I think a large part of that is a whole food plant-based nutrition for me. But I set out to run a marathon on the 1-year heart transplant anniversary because no one has ever done that. And I did it. But this is what so it was so cool about it. It was cool that happened. Yay, plant-based nutrition, right?
I'm telling you.
But at the finish line, there was this huge construction sign and it said Grace.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was really cool.
And your bib number was what?
365 days. So I named my heart Grace. And so Grace and I it's just the coolest thing.
Oh, legit chills.
And I got off the plane and guess what the flight attendant's name was? Grace. Today.
Messages are just all around us all the time, are they not?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I was like, I love your name.
Yeah. So, what does the future look like for you now? Where are you in 20 years, with 30 years, 40 years? Wow, you are truly the Energizer Bunny, Yeah,
well, the future is not necessarily about me, but it's about I have such deep meaning and purpose to serve humanity in a way that we can really push forward the importance of healthy living and what that means for our children and for us as adults as well. And so I'm so honored and privileged to be in this space at Mayo Clinic of lifestyle medicine, and especially driving that research forward with the importance of whole food plant-based nutrition, working on some super exciting projects. I am one of the physician representatives for Blue Zones in Jacksonville, Florida. So working beyond those walls of Mayo Clinic where we can bring the science to some of the areas of food insecurity. So that's very exciting. Working with some really exciting plans for regenerative farming. So working on funding for that. So if anyone's interested in funding a regenerative farm idea, this is going to be super amazing to allow us to look at cultivating aquaponics, where perhaps we'll have some of the most nutrient-dense crops with soils that will be very mineral-dense, so we don't have to worry about some of the farming concerns we have that are pesticide-free. And so very, very exciting about what's on the front, and can continue to inspire people to give them hope that.
I love that. I love
life
that.
matters. Yeah.
And let me end with this. What would your message be to somebody who is eating that ultra clean, ultra healthy diet? They're fit, they're active, and life still happens to them as it did to you, right? We always talk about lowering the risk. Nobody's ever bulletproof, but it can be so deflating for a lot of people when they feel like they're doing all the right things and still something happens and you were able to triumph. So what would your message be to that person?
I hear this a lot. I do see a lot of healthy folks that come in to see me because they get these diagnoses and they hear of my story. Is we know that the outcomes in particularly breast cancer patients who lived a healthy lifestyle before, and then God forbid they get cancer, they have improved outcomes because of that, because they lived healthy. What I always share with patients is if you didn't live that healthy lifestyle, maybe this would have happened 10 years earlier, right? We just don't know. Maybe you would have had a more advanced cancer, but at the end of the day, we have to accept. We cannot live in turbulence. And that's a very important invite to folks as well as your reason why you're living a healthy lifestyle. It should be to nourish, love, and support your body, not out of fear. You know, nothing I do is out of fear. It's because I love my body. I want to live in harmony with my body and give it what it deserves. I think that is what we are all asked to do, is to honor our bodies by feeding it things that matter, by resting, by moving our bodies, by having loving connections with one another. And so just accept and trust, and I don't think that things happen to us. I think they happen for us. And we can go down a path of post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic growth. And if you embrace that post-traumatic growth, there's such profound opportunity to learn from that and then to really help to inform humanity well beyond with what you experience in your own adversity, which is different for each of us. And thank you for being so kind and sharing that my story is an inspiration, but I am so blessed and honored every day to work with my patients because they continue to fuel my inspiration. My own personal inspiration is them.
Yeah.
It gives me chills to say that, but I see these amazing women, these mothers, and it's just such a privilege to be in that space that they trust me to be able to help guide them on their own health journeys. So we're all stories. You're an inspiration of everything you've been through.
Yeah. And I feel exactly the same way as you do with your patients. I feel the same way with the exam roomies who will message me or email me privately and share their stories with me. And like, we're all growing together. And I feel like you sharing your story today has really helped a lot of us. So thank you so much for the time. This is an interview like no other.
Oh, I don't know. Thank you, Chuck. It was so fun.
Yeah, this is the best. We got to bring you back and talk like nutrition science, and we'll nerd out about completely other topics. But
I love that part of it.
Let's do it.
I love the science. And that's why I love being at Mayo Clinic, because I love to drive that science. There's so much science that we know that the healthiest diet is a whole food plant-based diet. So be a part.
Nerd out soon? All right. We're going to nerd out.